Well, there's definitely a lot of tension here, Emma, and the closing arguments, as you guys mentioned, are about to begin any moment. They're expected to wrap up today, and then the jury will have as much time as they need to determine a verdict. But I'll take a look right now at this Hennepin County Courthouse where it's all going down today. You see National Guard vehicles behind me. They're here to help local and state law enforcement. About 3,000 National Guard troops are on hand. And then if somebody wanted to jump this fence and try to cause some havoc, they'd have to get through that razor wire in between these two layers of fences. So you can see the amount of protection that is being taken to defend this courthouse. And then if you look a little bit to my left right now, there are some protesters here early on. Again, since the closing arguments are just beginning, the crowd is still filing in. It's also in the 30s here in Minneapolis, so it's cold. Some people might be waiting until it gets a little bit warmer. But you guys mentioned boarded up businesses. Look at the Star Tribune behind us right here. That is the local newspaper here in Minneapolis. That building is boarded up, and that is a very common scene that we're seeing here in Minneapolis. So not only do you have that National Guard vehicle right on my left, on my right, there's another one blocking the main entrance of the courthouse. And obviously they're very concerned about the jury getting in here, about Derek Chauvin getting in here safely and securely. So it's basically Fort Knox around here, but just not that much activity yet. But that could all change in the next couple of hours. Back to you.
Yeah, we're seeing, as you say, boarded up businesses, all that fencing and increased National Guard's troops, all, of course, waiting on those closing arguments set to begin any moment now, and then the jury deliberation. Logan Ratick keeping an eye on it live in Minneapolis. Logan, thank you.
Hey, John. Well, the defense is now making its closing arguments inside the courthouse just behind me. And if we take a step to my right, you can see that we're at the calm before the storm. There are some protesters out here right now. They're peaceful. They're just hanging around. They have some signs up, but nothing in terms of violence so far. But Minneapolis is currently making preparations for that. Now, a lot of people are also wondering, how is this jury remaining safe and anonymous? And you can take a look. There's a lot of protection with a fence at this Hennepin County Courthouse. Now, the jurors park their cars at a secure location, and they're escorted into the courthouse through a private entrance. It could very well be the skyway that is connected to the building right here. Now, once they're inside, they're supervised at all times, even during breaks, and they're allowed to return home every night. So obviously they're taking as many precautions as possible to keep the jurors safe. We don't know where they come in and out of this building on a daily basis. But in terms of what we've seen in Minneapolis, John, a couple of blocks away downtown, they're already boarding up stores and restaurants. The people that are putting the plywood up are being protected by National Guardsmen. So it really is the calm before the storm. We don't know which way the verdict will go, but they're making the preparations here in Minneapolis, Minnesota's largest city, in case more unrest comes as a result of the decision. Back to you.
Well, you hope it's not needed, Logan. You hope there are just precautions there, but it is concerning. I heard you say earlier that you were there at the courthouse at the Hennepin County Municipal Complex, and somebody showed up to actually go to court, and they couldn't figure it out because there's so many barricades around the courthouse.
Yeah, a gentleman came up to me and my photographer, and he said, I don't even know how to get in. I have a court appearance today, but I can't get inside. That is how secure the perimeter is around this Hennepin County Courthouse. But the question is, if the verdict doesn't go the way that people wanted to, what will happen in downtown? They're boarding places up, but you don't see the type of protection that we see here. And even behind these fences, John, there's barbed wire before the next layer of fencing. So it really is secure at the courthouse. But the question is, what about the rest of this metropolitan area? Back to you.
It is a good question, considering what we saw last week. Logan, thanks so much.
Let's take you back live now to Minneapolis, where the prosecution giving closing arguments happening now. Let's listen in.
Twisting his fingers, holding his legs for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The defendant's weight on him. The lungs in his chest unable to expand because there wasn't enough room to breathe. George Floyd tried. He pushed his bare shoulder against the pavement to lift himself, to give his chest, to give his lungs enough room in his chest to breathe, with the pavement tearing into his bare skin. As he desperately pushed with his knuckles to make space so he'd have room to breathe, the pavement lacerating his knuckles. The defendant stayed on top of him for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So desperate to breathe, he pushed with his face to lift himself, to open his chest, to give his lungs room to breathe. The pavement tearing into his skin, George Floyd losing strength. Not superhuman strength. There was no superhuman strength that day. There's no superhuman strength because there's no such thing as a superhuman. Those exist in comic books. And 38th in Chicago is a very real place. Not superhumans, only humans. Just a human, just a man, lying on the pavement, being pressed upon, desperately crying out. A grown man crying out for his mother. A human being. And in that time, and in that place, while he was surrounded in life by people he knew him, faces he could pick out, there was no one there he knew. He was surrounded by strangers. Strangers, all of them. 9 minutes and 29 seconds. He's surrounded by strangers, not a familiar face to say his final words. But he did say them to someone. He said them to someone who he did not know by name, but he knew him from the uniform he wore and the badge he wore. And he called him Mr. Officer. That's what he called him, Mr. Officer. Mr. Officer would help, would call the police when we need help. And he pleaded with Mr. Officer. George Floyd's final words on May 25, 2020 were, "Please, I can't breathe." And he said those words to Mr. Officer. He said those words to the defendant. He asked for help with his very last breath. But Mr. Officer did not help. The defendant did not help. He stayed on top of him, continued to push him down, to grind his knees, to twist his hand, to twist his fingers into the handcuffs that bound him, looking at him, staring down at times the horrified bystanders who had gathered and watched this unfold. The motto of the Minneapolis Police Department is to protect with courage and to serve with compassion. But George Floyd was not a threat to anyone. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He wasn't trying to do anything to anyone. Facing George Floyd that day, that did not require 1 ounce of courage, and none was shown on that day. No courage was required. All that was required was a little compassion.
We are continuing to follow the Derek Chauvin murder trial here in Minneapolis, happening live. These are the final pleas, the closing arguments, if you will, from the prosecution to the jury. Making a very descriptive speech there. We're going to continue to monitor that. When the defense steps up in the Chauvin trial, we'll bring it to you live here on National Report. Stay with us.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.